Aloha, everyone. Welcome. I want to start this session by saying thank you to all of you who signed up and who registered to participate in Hoʻokele Naʻauao. I'm not sure if any of you here this is your first session for Ho'okele, or if some of you are returning. For those of you who are returning, I'm sure that you had lots of thoughts about today's earlier presentations. I know I did lots of reflecting after them, and I'll probably still be chewing on all of that for a little while. But yeah, we really appreciate everyone sharing their time with us today. So this is our last session for today. And before I start talking about this session, I want to say a really quick mahalo to our sponsors, the Institute of Museum and Library Services, the Native Hawaiian Library Services Program, and to the World Indigenous Nations University, Hawaii Pacifica, for sponsoring our project. I'd also just like to really quickly remind everyone of our code of conduct. Please demonstrate care, respect, and humility when engaging in this space. As this year's Ho'okele is dedicated to social justice, we will be prioritizing marginalized voices. So for Q&A, if you choose to self-identify as belonging to a marginalized group, especially a BIPOC community, and if you'd like to ask a question, you can go ahead and include an asterisk at the start of your question. Our moderators will know to prioritize those questions. Additionally, when it comes to questions, we ask that you consider this framework put forth by Eve Tuck in regards to peer reviewing your question. Okay, so let's get into this. Conversations on Hawaiian librarianship. In this session, we want to share a little bit about what different aspects of Hawaiian librarianship look like. I'm joined today by Michiko Joseph, Erica Diaz, and Shavonn Matsuda. All of us are members of Nā Hawaiʻi ʻImi Loa, the Native Hawaiian Librarian Association. So I'm going to start us off today with stories leading up to the first Hoʻokele Naʻauao back in 2013. At the time, we had no idea what we were doing, but I'll go into that a little more later. But I want to open a discussion about Hawaiian librarianship by talking about moʻoku auhau, genealogy, and moʻolelo stories. Moʻoku auhau we know as genealogy, right? And moʻolelo we know as stories. So when I think of these two words together, I think of identity. To echo Sandy's words from earlier today, who I was so inspired by, right? When I think about identity and who I am is wrapped up in who I relate to, who I belong to, as well as our stories, our shared knowledge, both inherited in our DNA and manifested in our activities. So I approach today's discussion of Hawaiian librarianship as a personal journey of identity. And I would not be who I am without these two women. On the left is my cousin, Melia Lobenstein Carter, and on the right is her grandmother, May Lobenstein. Auntie May is the oldest sister of my grandfather, Collins Long. May and Collins were two of 15 children born to Ida and Henry Long of Maui. Melia and May are also kumu hula, or hula masters, and leaders of the hula school, Kapa Hula o Kauanoe o Wa'ahila. Hula is a practice that has been in my family for 8 generations. As a mea hula, a hula practitioner, hula is how I relate to the world. It's the lens through which I approach life. So I said earlier that I would talk about stories leading up to the first Ho'okele Naʻauao in 2013. Genealogy is cyclical. None of us exist in a bubble. So anywhere that you pull on the thread, you pull on everything else it's connected to. I want to start pulling here with these 3 names: Mahealani Merriman, Kavika Makanani, and Keikilani Meyer. By the time I started library school in 2011, these 3 had already accomplished a lifetime's worth of work and to libraries and library services in Hawaiian communities. And they all continue that work today. A lesson I take from learning about their work is makahana kaike. Knowledge is lived experience. They are pillars in our communities because they were there to do the work. So I want to thank them here for the path that they walked before us. I want to add some more names to this story: Anne-Marie Paikai, Kavena Komiji, and Shavonn Matsuda. Without these 3 women, I would not be who I am today. They've become my family. And we met in library school. Funny enough, in an orientation room full of 50 people, most of them not Hawaiian, Anne-Marie ended up sitting right next to me. And turns out she had gone to undergrad with some of my classmates. When I think about Kavena, our fathers used to be frenemies. They worked together, but they also worked against each other for the phone company. And then Shavonn. Well, our kupuna were friends, and I think they made sure that we were friends. So a lesson that I take from these friendships is a recognition that our kupuna put us where we're supposed to be. In a million years, I would never have imagined that I would be a librarian, but now I can't imagine doing anything else. I'm gonna add some more names to this story. Ikaika Allen, Kapena Shim, and Koa Luke. And you can see Anne-Marie and Shavonn joined by these three in this pic. In 2012, we created Nā Hawaiʻi ʻImi Loa, a graduate student organization in the LIS program here at UH Mānoa. Nā Hawaiʻi ʻImi Loa, or NIL for short, was formed to assert Hawaiian perspectives in the LIS program. As my brilliant friend, Shavonn, said in her thesis, in an LIS program where none of the faculty were Indigenous and minorities really felt like minorities, NIL was a space for us to express our indigeneity. So something I take away from that time was, building community is the practice of resilience. And I don't mean resilience in a small or trendy way. Creating NIL was the first of many later examples where we would have to create spaces for ourselves, dare to assert our old worldviews. And oftentimes we were met with hesitation, a lack of support, and sometimes outright rejection. But NIL was my safe space. I want to continue to add some more names to this story. Guha Shenker, Analu Josephidis, Kale Hannes, Shane Calvelo Vallejo, and Pi'ilani Ka'alua. I said before that genealogies are cyclical, and these names are perfect examples of that. Pi'ilani Ka'alua. Shavonn and I were grad assistants for her and Nancy Shane while we were in our master's program. And today I get to call Pi'ilani my colleague, with both of us working at the Kamakuʻokalani Center for Hawaiian Studies. And now I think about Kale Hannes, who is the current manager for Oʻahu's Papakilo database. I've known him since I was little. I don't know if he remembers me. I think he does, but I've known him since he was little because he used to be in a band, Ale'a, and they would play music for our halal all the time. And Guha Shenker, a folk life specialist at the American Folklife Center at the Library of Congress. We first met at this ATOM in 2013. I was inspired by his work at AFC, and in 2018, I invited him to be a keynote speaker for the Hawaiʻi Library Association annual conference. And I'm happy to call him my friend today. I shared earlier today that ATOM 2013 was a pivotal moment in my library career. Up to that point, I had no idea what Indigenous librarianship was. I had been in the LIS program for 2 years, and not once had we had any meaningful conversations about this field in any of my courses. Attending ATOM was like turning a light on when I didn't even know I was walking around in the dark. I could see and be seen. It was validating, empowering, and inspiring. At ATOM, my indigeneity was celebrated, and I just hadn't had that kind of experience beforehand. This last list of names are those who presented at Hoʻokele Naʻauao 2013, which was held in fall 2013, a few months after returning from that amazing ATOM trip. I'd like to call out a few names here, and again, we see that genealogies and relationships are cyclical. Anahera Morehu, who we connected with again last year at ILF, was one of our keynote speakers at Hoʻokele 2013, as was Dr. Lorene Roy, who we connected with several times as part of a Hawaii partnership, and again at ILF last year and ATOM last year, all the conferences. Lastly, I'd like to recognize Kepa Mali. Uncle Kepa I met several years ago. He's a good friend of my hula sister's mom. His work with cultural resource management has inspired my own work. Here are some pictures from that first Ho'okele Naʻauao 2013. I'm so glad I was able to find them, or it would have just been a blank slide. But I'm sure you're asking Keahiahi, why are you showing us the food line? Well, Who you can't see in that food line serving food is Uncle Kepa, who was an invited panelist in Hoʻokele 2013. So Ho'okele 2013 was a mess. I mean, it was great, but it was also a bit of like, oh my gosh, what's happening? We were an hour behind schedule. It was hot. We were running around with chickens without our heads. We needed a lot of help. I'm not sure if any of you were there for that first 2013 Ho'okele. If you were, I apologize. Thank you for bearing with us, and thank you for coming back to another one. But like I said, we needed so much help, and without missing a beat, right? Without being prompted or asked, Uncle Kepa, who again was an invited panelist, a well-respected researcher in Hawaiian communities, he picked up a spoon and started serving, right? And so the lesson that I take from here is hanai. To serve is to care for. So that brings us to Ho'okele 2020 and all of the Ho'okele in between. I look at this list almost in bewilderment because again, we didn't know that we'd be here. We had no idea when we put together Ho'okele 2013 that we would continue to convene a space for Hawaiian librarianship. So when I think about Hawaiian librarianship, I think about these lessons, right? Makahana kaike, knowledge is lived experience. Nana kua, na oma kua, me na kupuna e malama mai. Our ancestors continue to care for us. A'ohe hana nui ke alu ia. Building community is the practice of resilience. Ike aku, ike mai, see and be seen. Hanai, to serve is to care for. I share these lessons as avenues through which to access Hawaiian librarianship. I'll close with a quote from my kumu. Dance is the showcase of your soul, and so we dance. In halal, hula is more than us showing up twice a week to sweat it out for 2 hours and then walking away with sore knees. Hula is a way of life. Hula is who we are. So librarianship then for me isn't what I do, but it's who I am in this context. Thank you. I am going to pass this on to Erica and Mitch.
Aloha mai kako. My name is Erica Diaz, and I am representing Nā Hawaiʻi ʻImi Loa, as Keahiahi said, and I'm very grateful to be here. I just want to mahalo Nil for inviting me to be a panelist today, and I'll let Mitch introduce herself as well.
Aloha everybody, my name is Michiko Joseph. Everybody calls me Mitch, as you can tell. Yes, very glad to be on this panel today representing Nil. Thank you everybody for coming.
Okay, so as Keahiahi was sharing with us, kind of, as she mentioned, the mo'oku auhau, the genealogy of Nil, Mitch and I are kind of just gonna go into some of the projects that we've been so fortunate to be a part of. And so kind of starting off, myself personally, I started off with Nā Hawaiʻi ʻImi Loa as a student in Library Information Science School. I started off back in 2015 as a student, and then I joined NIL in 2016 as part of the student group. And then I eventually became part of the professional organization. And so recently, right around the time I actually was graduating in 2018, NIL had the opportunity to sign on to a large federal grant. So Hui Kolu, it's a Laura Bush 21st Century Grant. It's a 3-year grant, so it's from 2018, and we're still doing it now until next year. And so we were contracted to provide cultural curriculum. Twice a year, we would have trainings. So every January and August. And so kind of the reason Mitch and I wanted to start off by talking about Hui Kolu is because it kind of was the start of some really good new partnerships. So we had already partnered with University of Hawaii LIS program, of course, being students, graduates of the program, but we also were partnering with Alulike and Hawaii State Public Library System and providing the trainings to them. And so I just have here kind of some workshops that we recently put on. So kind of just to highlight some of the work that NIL does out in the community, bringing forward Hawaiian librarianship, indigenous protocols, etc., are putting on workshops like this. So for example, as part of the Hui Kolu grant, one of the things that we did was we put on a workshop training. So Mitch will actually go into that in more detail later. So what I have here is, sorry, let me advance here. There we go. So this was kind of another big project that we kind of embarked on. So Mitch and I actually, Keahiahi was talking about ATOM, and it's kind of funny that that was kind of like the spark, the fire for her. I didn't know she was actually going to be talking about that. For myself, that kind of actually is what really got me very, very interested in Hawaiian librarianship as well. I am not Native Hawaiian myself, but I definitely very much respect Hawaiian culture. I love working with the Hawaii Pacific collections. And so one of the things that I got to do as part of NIL was go to ATOM last year, and Mitch and I presented on this crosswalk of protocols. And I apologize, I know it's like a super busy slide, but this is just a copy of the poster we presented. So what Mitch and I actually were doing was we wanted to find a way for the participants to have a better reference interaction. And so actually Keahiahi and I had kind of worked on this crosswalk of protocols, and then we presented it for Hui Kolu as part of the curriculum. And then later on, Mitch and I went to ATOM last October, and we presented there in Temecula. And it was amazing, exactly like what Keahiahi was describing for herself. Even though I'm not Indigenous, that's how I felt going to the conference. I felt very welcomed, and everyone was just so loving, and just the whole idea of Indigenous librarianship, it really sparked something for me and got me way more interested than I already was. You know, beyond just Hawaiian librarianship, kind of looking at other forms of Indigenous librarianship. And so kind of what we did was we have our protocols in the middle, and then we chose some olelo no'ea on the side to kind of just bring out the Hawaii aspect. And then, so that was 2019. And then moving on, this is actually going into, I'll hand it over to Mitch, and then I'll let her kind of talk about our ongoing kukua and kuleana.
Thank you, Erica. I was thinking about what Keahiahi said about moku Oʻahu and how I got involved with NIL. As actually I work at Kapiʻolani Community. You saw that name earlier on the slide, and she was like, I think in 2017, she said, do you want to be part of NIL? I'm going to put your name in. And I'm like, oh, okay. And then in 2018, I got to co-chair Hoʻokele Naʻauao that year with Kaiāulu. So yeah, everybody is interconnected in this group. So it's really easy and good people to work with. As far as NIL being involved this last few years, yes, through Hui Kolu, the project, we did get to reach out and make some good connections. And our group, we meet quite a bit. And so far we have, you know, in August, we did a descriptive practices for Hawaiian collections workshop with the Alolike people. They reached out to us for their projects. So we hosted a workshop for them, and that was really nice. The Alolike library staff is not necessarily librarians. They don't have an LIS degree, but they have a lot of cultural knowledge, and they're organizing their collection right now. So they were kind of getting stuck on some technical librarian terminology and practices. So we did host a workshop. It was well attended. I think they walked away from that better prepared to describe their collection. Another project that we are working on is HSPLS reached out to our group because, as you know, all of the libraries in the state have Ōlelo Hawaiʻi signage, and the state librarian has asked if our group can help them with pronunciations. And even I need help with some of the pronunciations, so I'll be probably paying attention at the same degree as they are. And also recently, Anne-Marie, one of our board members at NIL, she created a pathfinder for the Hawaii Council of Humanities for the Hawaii History Day project. That was really fun. I was there when she presented it to their board. It's very comprehensive. It's awesome. They were super happy with it. We're excited for it. We're excited for that partnership as well. And of course, you guys all know we have Ho'okele every year. And I was there in the 2013 Ho'okele. I thought it was good. I didn't see any kind of anything wrong with it at all. We just wanted to share some of the feedback we got from the work that we do, because I think that's important for us whenever we do workshops or I get even Ho'okele, we take feedback, right? So I remember for Ho'okele, we had a lot of great positive feedback, and we use that to make our new workshops better, to find new areas where we could help and be of use. So these are a few, and I think these are from Keahiahi's presentation on descriptive metadata. And even for me, like, realized even after I went through library school, you know, the indigenous voice is so important, and she presents it so well that we have this great feedback from people in the community. And I think we have one more slide, yeah. And this is the feedback some of the feedback that we got from our most recent workshop in August with the Alolike folks. And I think they were so hard at work thinking that they had to get the library science side of the project down, that they weren't thinking about how much knowledge that they already had within themselves, because they are cultural practitioners on that side. So I think after the workshop that we had with them in August, they were more confident in describing their collection with the knowledge that they already had. So I will pass it back to Shavonn. Yes.
Aloha mai kako. Ova Shavonn Matsuda, no hana mo'i mai au. Today I'm going to talk to you folks about a project that Keahiahi Long and I participated on, and I'll share more about the others who participated in this project. And that project is called Laulau Kaike. And our focus with this project was really on community-controlled vocabularies. And as part of this project, we asked ourselves, and we asked those in our community, how can we better support normalization of Hawaiian language and enhance access to Hawaiian collections? So for me, this is a personal project. As an undergraduate, I was very interested in researching Hana, which is the place where I'm from on the island of Maui in Hawaii. And I found it very difficult to do this research, partly because of the reason you're looking at on the screen, language issues in terms of Hawaiian language not being included in library databases. A lot of times the highest level of specificity allowed by these databases or library catalogs or what have you was really at the county level, which was not useful for me because Maui County, for those of you who know, includes 3 islands. And then in addition to that, hana is a very common word used in newspaper and other resources because it's defined in English as work or a job or a task. And more than that, there are other places in Hawaii like Hanalei that include the term, or that hana is part of those names. And so it's very difficult for me to research where my family was from, and quickly became problematic. And I needed to figure out how to solve this puzzle. And so entered into library school, learned that this was not a problem unique to where I was from, not even a problem unique to Hawaii, but many other indigenous librarians and others had already recognized this issue and started to address this. And so I then, in turn for Hawaii, questioned how might we offer a framework for organizing and representing Hawaiian knowledge, centering Hawaii epistemologies. And so after I finished my master's thesis on that topic, investigated, what might be needed, those kinds of things, we gathered a collective of partners, including World Indigenous Nations University, Hawaii Pacifica, with Uncle Peter and Tema, the Institute of Museum and Library Services. We talked with folks there and learned more about the Native Hawaiian Library Services grant, worked with some great people there. Uluka with Ruth and Bob and Keiki Kawaiʻaia. And then the University of Hawaii, mostly Keahiahi and I representing the university with the support of our library staff and colleagues. And then of course, Nā Hawaiʻi ʻImi Loa, who we've been talking about all afternoon. And so we came together and worked on the laulau kaike project. And really it's a kako thing. I'm gonna highlight a couple of things that we did as part of this project. It took place over a span of 2 years. And the essential mission of this, our objective, was about co-creation with our communities. So we met with local repositories and examined existing descriptive practices at our local repositories here in Hawaii. But we also were able to link up with others internationally in Aotearoa and in the First Nations in particular. So people like Anahera Morehu, Fina Tefiu, Sharon Farnell, Sarah DuPont, Ann Doyle, Kim Lawson, Camille Callison, and others. And they were so giving of their time and expertise. And really want to mahalo all of you. I know some of you are joining us this afternoon or this evening or tonight. I'm not sure, wherever you may be around the world. Mahalo. And then we convened members of our Hawaiian communities here in Hawaii, mostly, or I shall say, specifically communities on Oʻahu and Maui, where Keahiahi and I are from and work. And then we also worked with Uluko and database engineers in Aotearoa to create or to pilot the controlled vocabularies that came out of this project. And I'll say for this presentation, I'm really going to be focusing on the communities of practice that we convened as part of this project. So we formed 3 hui. One was composed of a hala hula, mea hula, kapa o kawanoi o Wa'ahila under Kumuhula Melia Lobenstein Carter, which is also the halau that Keahiahi is part of. We convened a hui, and hui is like a group of cultural practitioners that were currently pursuing a PhD at the time of the project because they were actively involved in research and practitioners, so that made it even more interesting. And a hui of kumu with expertise in ancestral Hawaiian knowledge. And really with this, our goal was to recognize the expertise of our communities and honor their voices. And more than just honor, we wanted to uplift their voices and recognize that the work that they're doing, even though they may not have the title of librarian or archivist, but recognizing the expertise that they have in their areas. And then of course, including these stakeholders, because these are the people that we envision as using the system that we would like to create. And part of the question for us was, how do you work with and for lahui? However you define lahui, whether your lahui is your family or your library or the nation of Hawaii, however you define lahui, how are you working with and for them? And so we brought these groups together and we met a few times, and really what we were trying to do with them was identify facets and cultural frameworks for a Hawaiian knowledge organization system and identify the scope of Hawaiian knowledge, which, as you can imagine, these are huge questions. When we talk about Ike Hawaii and ideas of defining it or trying to create, trying to identify bounds, perceived bounds of Ike Hawaii, you can quickly see how very engaging and lively these conversations were for us. And continue to be as we continue to have conversations with these folks. What you see on the screen right now are some of the ideas and concepts and values that our participants shine light on during our conversations. And interestingly enough, just because we're talking about it most of today, pilina, or what could be defined as relations or relationality or relationships, was a driving theme throughout all of our hui that met. And then they also recognize mana as being part of the conversation of knowledge organization in terms of creators of knowledge, those who care for knowledge, and in terms of the preservation of knowledge and preservation and access to that knowledge. All right. Oh, I also wanted to mention that when we were meeting with our group, so one of the things that came up regularly actually was this idea of research, and there was this hesitancy around, no, we don't do research, like that's not me, or those kinds of ideas that really point to the historical trauma that Indigenous people, and for our case, that Hawaiians have dealt with these ideas of research being done on us, applied to us, or these blatant theft of our knowledge, and placing authority on the others. Okay, so we gathered all of that information, and Keahiahi and I provided a layer of analysis, which we then held in conversation with our hui. And these are some of the facets that came out of that. So some of these ideas already exist in some databases. So things like inoa, I just realized these are mostly in Hawaiian. Things like the name of your author, or when it was pa'i'ia, when it was published, makau, and the language, or the first line of the song, or the references. But then there are a lot of things that are not in existing library and archival knowledge organization systems. And to some degree, they include mention of aina or place, but not to the degree, like I mentioned, that would be useful for us as researchers. And so on the screen there, you see how we have chosen to highlight aina place as one of those facets that we would like to move forward in our Hawaiian knowledge organization system. And really, this is based on Hawaiian ways that we organize land or think about aina from a Hawaiian perspective, and breaking it down, breaking land divisions at least by moku puni, moku, and ahupua'a. And as you can imagine, there are greater levels of specificity that we could go into, but this is the level to which we were able to achieve in our short time on this project. But also the idea of haku, or creator, and the importance of understanding who that person was, who were their kumu, or who were their mentors, who were their teachers, and really pointing to, as Keahiahi talked about earlier, that mo'okuauhau, or genealogy, whether it be ancestral or genealogy as related to their cultural practice or other learning, and how important that was or is for us. And then also we played a lot, or we had conversations with ideas of how do we conceptualize time. Currently it's by years, right? But from a Hawaiian perspective, we characterize or represent years differently. Our seasons are different. So things like winter, when we're looking at things, or even showing storybooks, right? These things have different meaning for us. In terms of wet and dry season, in terms of makahiki season, in terms of times for politics, times for peace or agriculture, or those kinds of things. And then in terms of format, not limiting to current understandings of things that belong in a library, or belong in a library, as limiting those to books and things like that. The divisions between libraries, archives, and museums become blurred when we're talking about ʻIke Hawaiʻi, or removed altogether. And then also recognizing the different ways that mana are represented in these various formats by these creators, and as well as by those who enter into the system. What is their mana? What are their kulana? And how do we provide access what is their positionality, and how do we provide access in ways that meet their positionality? We also talked a lot about akua. This is another field that we want to highlight in terms of gods or deities. And as I translate these for you, I hope it's coming across how problematic these are. But akua and kino lau, in terms of the forms that our akua take, and what are the relationships between these various kino lau and our akua. And then we talked about Kanaka and various other subjects that could be recognized or represented by a Hawaiian knowledge organization system. Interestingly, again, we talked a lot about access protocols, which Keahiahi and I had talked about before, but the level to which we were able to talk about and identify protocols with these groups, it was just amazing. And too much to attempt to summarize in this presentation, but just recognizing how knowledge organization and access involves a lot of different things, including protocols, including how we understand ʻIke, how we understand education or think about these things, how we would like knowledge transmission to resemble ancestral practices and current practices by cultural practitioners and others in our communities, so that these systems are no longer foreign, but can be claimed for ourselves and use our own systems, which continue to be practiced in our communities. So access was just one of those things. Reflections and continuing this work. So on the screen there, you see some of the reflections shared by our participants in our various hui. So some of them talk about, I enjoyed the combination of varied search terms, layers of how to allow for access and searching and identifying. I also love the wrestle with the varied ways we approach and view of ʻIke. And so we talked, as you can see there, we talked a lot about layers of meaning and how we don't want to constrict meaning to just one definition, but allow the system to shed light on the varied levels of meaning and relationships that are necessary to researching any topic that someone might come into your library to look at. And then another participant said, I think our group brought varied insight and yet has common threads. And this was very true. Throughout all of our three hui, there were a lot of common threads shared, and it shouldn't have been as surprising as it was that these values and ideas would be shared across groups, but it made it that much easier or clear for Keahiahi and I to highlight these common threads, which you saw some of that in the word cloud that I shared earlier, things like pilina, mana, mo'okuoho, etc. And then another participant said, loved analyzing different items, pieces. Those are part of the activities that we did with them, but loved more the conversations and stories and connections that were brought up and triggered by those pieces. And for me, this highlighted the impact that the knowledge organization system and libraries can have for people, for our communities, in terms of connecting these mea waiwai in our collections with our communities and with the stories that live on in our families and in our communities, or may have been hidden in the libraries. Unfortunately, that is the reality. And so reconnecting with these stories and voices that our kupuna left for us. And then as we look to continue this work, we are forming a group within the University of Hawaii, just happens to be where Keahiahi and I work, and hope to move this project or continue to move this project forward with those folks that we were working with and are working with, hopefully continue to work with, and expanding that reach so that we can include others, not just from Maui and Oʻahu, but from other islands, from other cultural practices. And I just leave us with the comment there from one of our practitioners. I feel like they really helped cheer us along and bring us through this project in more ways than can really be expressed. But they talked about trusting the complexities of your visions. Keahiahi mentioned earlier on about, turning on the light and you didn't know the room was dark. That is what we see as possible as part of this project, not just with bringing these ideas or imagining this future, but in the benefits that this system will have for our communities and for Hawaiian knowledge going forward. So we're really hopeful and look forward to continuing to work with our communities for this and growing our communities to expand not just knowledge organization, but the role of libraries for Hawaii. And with that, I say mahalo, and I will pass it on to Keahiahi.
And I want to say mahalo to Erica, Mitch, and Shavonn for sharing their stories today. I'll say that I am responsible in a guilty way for this panel, right? We've had Hoʻokele Naʻauao, now this is the 7th instance, And at every single instance of Hoʻokele Naʻauao, we've had a discussion with a specific Hawaii focus, if not several discussions. And so we were really excited about our schedule and our programming for this year. And we wanted to make sure that we include, again, this conversation about Hawaii. And so I asked my friends if they would be willing to spend some time with me and talking a little bit about the work that we do. And thankfully they all said yes, right? I'm very grateful and very blessed to be friends with these wahine, with these women. But I'll say that this was a bit of an uncomfortable space for us. I think this is us growing. As you know, a lot of us are relatively youngish in our careers. I don't know how much longer I can keep saying that, but we haven't done a panel like this before about Hawaiian librarianship. And so we really appreciate you folks, again, just lending us your ear. And we are so grateful to all of you who have guided us in this work and who have shared with us your time and your space and your energy and your own genealogies. And we feel supported, incredibly supported by this community that envelops us. So thank you to all of you for joining us. I will say that we have a question, Shavonn Haven, for you in the Q&A. It's from Anaheta. Providing access from an LCHS perspective is different to Indigenous transformations in this arena. What challenges do you think you may face for acceptance by LCHS in the mahi that you're doing around this?
Mahalo for that question. Mahalo, Anahela. Honestly, to be completely honest, our focus has been on Hawaii and working with the institutions here, many of whom use LCSH, but our focus first and foremost has been on Hawaii and what tools we need to create for ourselves. We definitely recognize that there would be wider application if Library of Congress were to, I guess, accept the system that we create. But at this stage in the project, that has not been our primary focus. And I would venture off to say not even in the top 5 or 10. And I guess we're hopeful too for the technology in the ways that linked data and other ideas and technologies continue to be available, so that, again, and you know this, we're not limited to just one way of representing, but we can provide that layered understanding, and we can even bring their system into our system, those kinds of ideas for the future. Hope that answered the question.
Yeah, mahalo, Shavonn. I'll say that this journey into knowledge organization work has been exciting for me, and I'm really grateful to my friend Shavonn for being the Ho'okele for this project, for holding that vision for us to create a Hawaii KOS. It's exciting, scary, wonderful, life-affirming work, and again, we're just grateful to everyone who has helped us to get to the point where we are. I have another question for the group, and this one is from Ku'ule. Aloha Ku'ule. What is the role of non-Hawaiians in Hawaiian librarianship? I'll start really quickly and just say that Hawaiian librarianship, like I said, for me at least, is who I am in this context, right? In a sense of, it isn't something where I put my hat on and at 8 a.m. when I walk into the library, I am going to practice Hawaiian librarianship. And so that's just my own relationship with this idea of Hawaiian librarianship. That being said, I think all of us recognize how important allyship is and how important support is. We are minorities in our own homelands, and we cannot do this work alone. I think that sentiment was echoed by Sandy and by Sophia earlier today. And so for non-Hawaiians, and I'll say, working with those who have been a part of NIL, I am just grateful for them doing the work, for showing up, right? And unpopular opinion, sometimes working with Hawaiians, even when we are Hawaiians, is difficult. I think we know that for ourselves, right? Like, relationships take time. Sometimes relationships are so tangled for generations, right? And so not every relationship, even amongst our own communities, is one that we should be engaging in. But for me, I'm just grateful that those allies who have jumped on to support NIL have shown up every day to do the work and have been incredibly supportive of advancing our goals and our lahui. Sorry, I went on a bit of a soapbox, Kule, kalamai. But if any of the other panelists wanna jump in for that question?
I'll jump in since I'm the only non-Hawaiian on the panel. I think for me, I'm exploring that. I don't really know exactly. I think for me, I feel very uncomfortable a lot of times not being Native Hawaiian, not being any kind of indigenous. I think that it's listening, and I know I'm not the best listener, but I try to listen and I try to help where is needed. But above all, I think, and this is probably a bad thing, I think I'm a loudmouth, because loudmouth in the sense that I try to tell people, as much people as I know, like, oh my God, ulukau or papakilo or whatever, you know, it's like these things I learned in library school that I'm like horrified that nobody ever taught me, nobody ever taught anybody I knew. So that's kind of what I feel, at least my role is to help and like tell as many people as I can that they need to learn about this stuff. And especially living here, you know, I mean, I've always been interested in Hawaiian culture, but especially after going to ATOM last year, it made me more interested in my own genealogy, because to be honest, I feel like as a white person living in Hawaii, like I'm not proud, like I was never interested in my genealogy, and no one ever like taught me to explore that or be proud of it. But after ATOM, again, even though I'm not indigenous, it made me want to be interested in myself more. So I just appreciate being part of the group and being welcomed, because everyone is very loving and very welcoming. So I mahalo you guys for that.
And that aloha goes both ways, right? Aloha is love and embracement and safety. And aloha is also accountability. And I think that piece is something that we've tried to grow the muscle a bit, right? Again, us sort of being Opio in this space, how often do we get to exercise? Opio as in, how do I translate this? Opio as in transitionary. We're not necessarily young in this area, but we're also not wise in this area. We're sort of in that in-between space. And so, right, so how often do we get to exercise that like holding someone else accountable muscle? And right, like who are we? Like it's at the end of the day kind of idea. Yeah, so it's a growing. We're all growing and continuing to grow in lots of ways. But thank you, Ku'ole, for the question, and thank you to Erica for your response. I see another question here. This one is from Kawila. So her question is, do you think there should be a Hawaiian Librarianship / Hawaiʻi community type grad requirement course in LIS? Like not an optional register on the Hawaii Nuiakea side of LIS, but on the actual LIS side. And I'll jump on first to say, mahalo nui Kawila for the question. In 2017, I taught a grad class that I had written for the LIS program called Foundations of Hawaiian Collections. Really what it was a chance for me to explore this idea of Hawaiian librarianship from theory. Right, I get to practice Hawaiian librarianship every day, but writing the class, creating the class, and writing the syllabus was a chance for me to conceptualize what I meant right through this practice. And I haven't offered it since, but I know that the LIS program is committed to advancing Indigenous librarianship in their program. They're committed to advancing Hawaiian librarianship in their program. I think some logistical things have gone on. I don't think these are trade secrets, right? UH is reorganizing several of their programs. The LIS school is moving to communications. And I think and with the hiring freeze, they're not able to hire an Indigenous librarian faculty, but I know that they were on track to do that before the pandemic hit. So So that's where they're at. I know there's been conversations lately in the program about how to offer courses in Indigenous librarianship without a tenure track faculty position in the program. And thankfully, Dr. Roy has offered her Indigenous librarianship class a few times now for the LIS program. But I absolutely kako'o that idea that it should be a requirement in their LIS program. We're the only LIS school in Hawaii, right? Why would you come to Hawaii to get your LIS degree and not have any coursework about Hawaii or about the practices of Hawaiian knowledge management? Yeah, just my 2 cents, but I'll throw it out to the rest of the panelists if anyone else wants to answer.
I'll just add on, I think you made great points, Keahiahi, but I think the idea of requiring Hawaiian librarianship or Hawaiian community classes presupposes that we have Hawaiians or we have Kanaka as faculty in that program. And I say Kanaka in a plural sense because one is not enough. And then it also presupposes that we have all of the content, whether it be published or in writing or video or all those kind of things. So there's a lot of work that could go there for all of us. Yeah, yourself included, Kawila, in creating that really, and discipline is not the best word here, but to create all of that or shed light on all of that because it already exists. We just need to bring it forward. So I think there's a lot of work that could be done to take us on that path for it to be required in the LIS. But I think the creation of one class, that's the wrong question, you know, because we've been talking about it a lot. It's more about like, how do we build out Hawaiian librarianship as I think Keahiahi is describing for Hawaii? Like, yeah.
I see a question here from Kiel. Aloha, Kiel. What types of efforts at the curriculum level in UH are being pursued to include digital librarianship and recruiting Native instructors? How can Native Hawaiians or other organizations support this? I hear the question, Kiel, and you know what? I think a lot about the work that you are doing with Mukuru and with the Sustainable Heritage community. And I'll say that there's some pieces about digital librarianship and the intersection with Indigenous worldviews across campus. I don't know that there's a big concerted effort. I don't think it's a wave that's building yet, and I don't think it's cresting. I think it's still trying to find the waters to pull from. Right, there's Gary's project, which you're familiar with, Kiel. The LIS program has a couple of digital librarianship coursework in their program, but it's definitely an area that we need to that we need to strengthen and continue to grow in. But I think the work that Shavonn's doing around knowledge organization will be critical to allowing digital access and management of cultural heritage artifacts. Sorry, Shavonn, I muted so that I could tag you if you wanted to add on to that. No, okay. Well, I don't see any more questions in the Q&A, but I want to say again, mahalo nui to everyone for joining us today for day one of Hoʻokele Naʻauao, a Hawaiian Librarianship Symposium 2020. This is our first time holding this symposium virtually. And so sort of like 2013, where it was our first time holding this session ever, we're trying to get our legs underneath us. So mahalo for supporting us, for joining us for these discussions. We look forward to seeing you folks tomorrow. Just a quick housekeeping note, if you'd like to share your reflections from this session, we would love to hear your feedback. You can provide your feedback at www.nahawaiʻimiloa.com/evaluation.html. And just a quick note about what's happening tomorrow at, oh gosh, I didn't change this, sorry, Tuesday. Okay, at 10 o'clock is Abigail Eckelhawk, and she will be talking about decolonizing data. And then at 12 o'clock is Lessa, who I think was in this session. And Lessa's going to be talking about her work as a Kanaka on the continent. And so I'm really looking forward to seeing their presentations tomorrow. And so with that, we will say good evening, everyone. Mahalo nui again for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you all again soon. Thank you. Hui hou. Aloha.